Hi, folks. I'm Jon Pareles. I got top billing on this, but I want to give it to Leo because Leo was the real prime mover on this book. Leo knew of this fantastic archive of photos and put them together, and I hope he'll talk about them to start.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Emily, do you think we could make this go around?
Yeah, would you like lights off as well?
Sure. We have a great PowerPoint presentation of the kind of body of Don's work that Tom Tierney, the chief archivist at the Sony Music Studios, assembled. Will it dissolve? Will it dissolve?
It should.
Yeah. There are roughly 10,000 photo shoots credited to Don in the Sony archives. DeeAnne Hunstein is here, to John's right.
Hello.
And Don Hunstein is to her right. And as soon as this PowerPoint starts, heats up, you're going to see the best of, or just no, actually.
You can see a fraction of 10,000.
A fraction of 10,000 photo shoots. For many years, I've had the privilege of being in the Sony building and kind of helping the company preserve the legacy of modern masters and introducing this body of work to a new generation. And it was in the early 90s that in the halls of Legacy Recordings that I met Don. And you know, I'm a kid who grew up on 79th and Broadway, and I would hang out at Woolworth and Sam Goody and Corvettes, and albums were my life raft, and the radio. And I was born in '57, and by the mid-'60s, I was old enough to make a connection between what I was hearing on the radio and picture sleeves in the record store, and then and albums. And I would just, I probably had dyslexia at an early age and couldn't concentrate on my studies, but I sure could devour concert reviews in the newspaper and album credits on 12-inch LPs. And I knew Don's name when I was 10 years old. And then to be an adult and to meet him at Sony and to walk with him down to the archives where he would show me, where he would so generously walk me through sessions. Well, this book is the culmination of that generosity of his spirit.
And you should, I mean, Don Hunstein was the staff photographer at Columbia for 30-something years. When did he start? He started in
the late 50s.
So, and he was there till the mid-'80s.
The mid-'80s, right.
So
I think it was 86 or...
This is 3 decades when Columbia's roster included Johnny Cash and Leonard Bernstein and Aretha Franklin and Thelonious Monk and some guy named Bob Dylan and all of these amazing American figures. And what I didn't get to meet Don until recently, but what struck me, the reason I agreed to do the book when Leo generously asked me to write for it, was I looked at these and, you know, there wasn't the making of the video documentary in the studio every time somebody walked into a studio. There wasn't Instagram, Facebook. People weren't documenting themselves. There were no selfies back then. And so the photos that Don took of these private moments are what we have to see how this great music was made. and I was just bowled over by it.
I was thinking we should do a roll call. Don photographed Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, Charles Mingus, and Thelonious Monk. That's the jazz royalty. How about the classical titans? Glenn Gould, Leonard Bernstein, Vladimir Horowitz, Pablo Casals, Igor Stravinsky, Philip Glass, Placido Domingo, Yo-Yo Ma. The crooners, Barbra Streisand, Tony Bennett, Johnny Mathis. He photographed Aretha Franklin, Mahalia Jackson, Janis Joplin, Sam Cooke, Duke Ellington, Langston Hughes, Johnny Cash, Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs, Pete Seeger, Simon and Garfunkel, The Byrds, Joan Baez, Phoebe Snow, and Bob Dylan extensively. And we've picked 5 different images that DeeAnne can talk about in a second, but I'd like to, the original title in my mind for this book was called Working Man, because Don was a working man. I mean, it wasn't a lunch pail, but it was his camera. Maybe, DeeAnne, you could tell us a little bit about Don's day.
Yeah, what would he do in the course of a work day?
Well, he'd get up and get on his bicycle in the morning. He was always an avid biker. Went everywhere with his, cameras and on his bike. Sometimes he had to stop at the lab, and sometimes he had to, make other stops. But he would. When I met him, there was a wonderful photo studio in Black Rock. It was
Black Rock is a CBS building on 52nd Street.
Right. Sorry, it was. Right over a garage area, but it was really very nice. It had its own lab. It had plenty of space for shoots, and so obviously that's where he hung out. And then sometimes, he shot all over. He went to concerts. He shot in the studio, but he also went on excursions with people. And Bob Dylan, of course, was famous because his first photo shoot was in his little apartment in a tenement on the top of West 4th Street. So he often got a chance to go to people's homes. Went down to Johnny Cash's farm, went on tour with Leonard Bernstein to Russia, went on tour to Japan with Ormandy and Bernstein. Anyway, so he really got around. There was no ordinary working day for him. Every day was a new challenge. He always insisted that he could meet the people beforehand. He never had just people walk in off the street and shot them. He needed to get to know who they were and observe them so that he knew what he was going to be looking for, to be really able to characterize that person.
DeeAnne, John wrote something beautiful to that effect. In the book, John wrote, in an era before home video and reality TV, before the making of documentaries and cell phone cameras, before MTV and Facebook, Don's career gave him close-up access to moments the public would never see otherwise. He photographed musicians at work and musicians unwinding, musicians very conscious of creating an image, and musicians with their guard down. For many listeners, his images of Miles Davis, Bob Dylan, Glenn Gould, Thelonious Monk, and Leonard Bernstein have grown inseparable from their music. His photos were, in those less exhibitionistic times, the lasting, iconic images of the musicians to be pondered and scrutinized on album covers or in magazines.
There was also this great thing that he said in an interview. He used to photograph a lot. Columbia had studios in, was it a former church?
Oh, well, yes, the recording studio of 30th Street, the famous recording studio where so many things were, everything from symphonic albums, Broadway albums, Glenn Gould. Everybody loved 30th Street because the acoustics were amazing. And it was a former church. Unfortunately, it was destroyed and knocked down for a big apartment building or something. But there's still an organization called the Friends of 30th Street. Really? And they meet and they talk about the old days, yes.
he also said that the lighting there was very even. The lighting there was, I mean, it wasn't a glamorous studio, right? It was just like fluorescent lights.
Because there was no. Yeah, that's right. He often took his own lighting if he needed it, but yes, 30th Street. That's right. I didn't think about that. There was no daylight, which was good because the sun would shine, irregularly, and this way it was predictable, and he had control over the lighting. So I never thought of that, but I was there many times. Went to some really great recording sessions.
Jon, I'm sorry. Don's mission. We spent a lot of time. It took 5 years to get a publisher. It's taken almost 3 years to once the publisher was secured to put this book together. And it was always clear to me that Don's mission was clear. Present the most flattering images for the Columbia Corporation, and Jon will attest to this, Don's core instincts were always journalistic because he trafficked in a reality, not a fantasy. And he told me once, I was merely a living witness. He said, and this is a quote, "What does any good journalist do? Record what's going on, observe the artist and their expressions, then leap in. You've got to react to something that's happening or anticipate that it's about to happen."
Which is not necessarily the glamour photo you get now, that's been airbrushed to the max. I mean, I look at these photos. I mean, they're not glamorized. This is what happened at the time. This is how they looked, and I'm really moved by them, especially in our more artificial era. I don't know. Should we go to some of the photos that we loved? I mean, the photo that everybody knows, that everybody in the world has seen by Don Hunstein is the album cover of the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, which was kind of impromptu.
DeeAnne, do you want to tell the story of how Don was able to coax Bob and Susie from the tenement?
Sure. I wasn't around at that time because that was 1963 and we met in 1966, so it was a little before my time, but I've heard the story many times. They had put out an album. I guess it was it John Hammond who first discovered him? Yes. And he thought this kid, and he was a scruffy kid from Minnesota, 19, and well, I knew some people who knew him back home, and they said, "What's the big deal with this little Bobby Zimmerman? What's he doing?" Anyway, but this guy recognized that he had talent, and so they did the first album, and it was taking off, and he said, "I think we better get some photos of this kid. I think he's going to be big." So they sent Don down to his apartment on West 4th Street near Cornelia Street.
Positively 4th Street, right?
It was what?
Positively 4th Street.
Positively 4th Street, right. And positive, yeah, right. So he went up and he did a lot of pictures in the apartment. There were chairs with stuffing falling out of them, and it was just like, this was bohemian New York. I mean, after all, this was 1963, and Susie was there. Susie Rotello, who was his girlfriend at the time, and I believe that they met, I know, when she was 17 and he was 19, and this was maybe only a year later or so. So they were very young, and she was living there with him, and they so after, but he did some pictures of the two of them. She was sitting on his lap, and they were acting like two kids in love. And then Don said, "Well, I think we've exhausted this. The apartment didn't offer too many beautiful angles." He said, "Why don't we go down in the street?" And he said, "I know it's cold, but the light's fading fast, and if we don't do it now, we won't have a chance to take a picture out there." So they went down, and Susie said, knowing how cold it was out, she said she got her warmest sweater, her warmest coat, bundled up, and Bob said he wanted to wear his suede jacket because that's what the way he wanted to appear. And he was freezing, and you can see how he's shivering in that photograph. But that's part of the charm. You know, here they are it's become an icon, and even people who saw a picture of Michelle and Obama after the inauguration walking down a cold, windy avenue in Washington, D.C., saw something very similar and juxtaposed them into the background of the Freewheelin, and it really made sense because here they were, two young people kind of starting off on a journey they knew not where, and with lots of cold and icy forces around them. And I think that's why people see this as the beginning. Of course, at that time, it was the beginning of an era, and a lot of people who remember that time identify with that spirit. And of course, knowing what happened to Bob Dylan, you know, they see a lot of in the future. So anyway, that was the story. Susie was all bundled up, and he was in his cold leather jacket. And very quickly, the light faded, and Don had only a chance to get 2 rolls, so he snapped quickly, and that was it. So it wasn't taken for any particular purpose except just to add to the archives. However, I was told later, and this was amazing because it was the art director who told me that Dylan himself picked the picture out that he wanted on his next album, and it was that picture. So that was not an art director's choice. That was Dylan's own choice, which was something I never knew. Yeah.
Yeah, Susie Rotolo hated that picture, by the way. She thought that the jacket made her look fat because she was all bundled up. She said she wrote in her autobiography, it made me look like a sausage.
But that photo spoke to Don's appreciation for Cartier-Bresson, the French photographer, who spoke about, he was the champion of the decisive moment, that singular moment when something great is unfolding.
Well, you know that Cartier-Bresson was Don's inspiration to take up photography. He was in the Air Force stationed in England, and he went to France and saw this book in the window and purchased it and looked at those photographs. And he went back to London and tried to create or capture those moments, and that was the beginning of his career. So it's.
Speaking of London, can you tell us the significance of this photograph and Simon and Garfunkel's relationship in your life?
Okay. Well, it's too bad that that's not one of the ones from Hyde Park. But we actually had our honeymoon in London in September of 1966 because they were sending Don over there to take pictures of Simon and Garfunkel.
Business and pleasure.
So we got a free trip to London. Anyway, we had a great time, and we had fun with them, and they were really, you know, running through. I mean, that was the era of Carnaby Street, and London was the hippest place going. I mean, it really was. And I remember purchasing my really snazzy bell-bottom suit with stripes and fitting right into the scene.
And at some point, you were teaching at Hunter, and didn't Paul come by your class?
Oh, yes, indeed. Shortly after that, I was teaching English at the Hunter High School, which was a girls' school at that time. Very wonderful, bright kids, and they were doing a project on poetry, and a couple of them had decided to do song lyrics, and a couple of them were interested in Bob Dylan's lyrics. And so I happened to have, I can't remember. I'm sorry, I just said Bob Dylan. Sorry, Paul Simon's lyrics. Too much Dylan here. Anyway, I said, well, you know, we know Paul, and I think they were over for dinner one night, and I happened to mention this project, and I said, how would you like to talk to my students? And he said, oh, I'd love to. And he agreed to come in to talk to them about writing lyrics. And of course, I couldn't, they were very popular at that time, so I couldn't put out any information about what was going to happen. I cleared it with the administration, but I made sure that he walked in 10 minutes after everybody was in their classrooms, and we met in the library, and I just simply told my class that I had a little surprise for them. Of course, when he walked in the room, they freaked out. But they very quickly warmed up to him, and he was terrific. And the first thing he said is, I want you to know, I don't consider what I do poetry. He said, I love poetry. I have too much respect for it to call song lyrics poetry. He said, but song lyrics are a form of their own. And he began to talk to them, and they got into conversation. And it was a really wonderful session. He was very serious about really not strutting his stuff, but really getting into a very good discussion about their work. He was interested in what they were doing, what they liked, and it turned out to be a great time. I actually recorded it on a little machine that I have no idea if it would be. I've been thinking I would love to hear this again, and I don't know if the tape is even of any value now. But that was quite an experience. And afterwards, after he left, and he had to leave a few minutes before the bell rang because he didn't want to be in the hall, and slipped out. And they all came up to say, "You didn't even give us time to put on our makeup. We didn't even have time to comb our hair." But they were so thrilled.
Wow. That was that. I mean, to be that close too. I mean, musicians now are always sort of, oh, my manager says I don't have time to do that. But, he'd walk in and do that.
Right. Oh, he was great.
I mean, that's the feeling I get in a lot of photos in this book. Is like they're just they're more regular people.
Yeah.
Of the thousands of artists that Don photographed, he had a very special relationship with a handful, most notably Glenn Gould. This is one of our favorite photos.
You got to tell me what's going on here, because I have not a clue.
He's conducting. Can't you tell? Okay. That's what he's doing. He's listening to something, he's got the score in front of him, and he's conducting. He was a very flamboyant conductor. Fortunately, he couldn't play the piano at the same time, so it limited his conducting career.
John has pointed out that Don and Glenn were almost co-conspirators.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of those sessions?
Well, Don, first of all, they really had a great relationship, and Glenn was he got a reputation for being antisocial. He wasn't at all. He had very fast friends, and when he had a friend, you really knew it. I mean, and he and Don got along so well. Not as a friendship, really, as a working relationship, because he had so much respect for Don that he collaborated in the photography. He thought up some of the locations. He was always giving suggestions to Don about where to go, and some of the best pictures he did were really because Glenn had suggested them. There's one in an old deserted department store. There's one in these were back when he was doing them, this was kind of not what everybody else was doing. He went out into the snow, and he called that his Sibelius series. And he's all bundled up with his hat and his muffler and his gloves, of course. But it was a real collaboration, and Don really respected him and enjoyed doing that very much. And I got a chance to go to Toronto a couple of times too and meet him, and he was terrific. At the end of one session, a recording session, Leonard Rose and Glenn did a recording together. Glenn turned to me, and he knew that I was a singer, and I had done some opera, and he instantly said, "And this is for you," and he sat down and he did an improvised version of La Traviata for me, just as a personal little gift. I mean, I thought that was, I was floored. But he was great at improvising, and he could do that right off the spot. So.
I'm sorry some of that wasn't recorded. I'd love to hear it.
No, all the engineers were gone. It was just us in the studio at the time.
Wow.
Right.
DeeAnne, can you just tell us your thoughts about the book?
Well, I mean, wow. It's after all of this time, finally a book. I was just saying to John Berg, who was one of the first designers in Columbia Records that Don worked with, and that if he remembered, he used to have these summer parties with the design department, always invited Don and I, and at that time I started talking to somebody saying, you know, Don's done so many great pictures, why doesn't somebody do a book for him? And I was talking about, and that was that was in the beginning of the 70s, so how many years ago was that? 40 years? Yeah, right. I really thought there should be a book. And then there were many opportunities. People came to him. Tim Page used a lot of his pictures in his book about Glenn and wanted to do a book with Don. And somehow the time was never right. There just wasn't really a market. The publishers would get excited and then the interest would disappear and nothing ever happened. And so it was Leo and his persistence, good old Leo, who was determined to make it happen.
Thank you.
So, at last, and we're also hoping that this isn't the last book that will be published.
Oh man, let's talk about what's on the cutting room floor. Boy, you know, there's definitely another volume.
Well, I just want to say, for those of you who have wheels, there's a exhibition of some of the stuff on the cutting room floor in Bethel, New York. Right at the Woodstock Museum.
Right.
Where the side of the Woodstock Festival was.
Bethel Woods is the site of where Woodstock took place, and there's a marvelous performing arts center and museum there, and it's basically dedicated to the 60s and the music of the 60s, but it goes even beyond that. If you weren't fortunate enough to be at Woodstock, at the original Woodstock, go. They have a room which makes you feel you're there. They've got images and videos all over, so you feel like you're just in the middle of a mosh pit or whatever it is that was going on, and you say, "Thank God I wasn't there." But they were.
DeeAnne, we're very fortunate because a gentleman named Wade Lawrence is here.
Yes, of course.
And Wade was the curator of this exhibit, and it runs through the end of the year, and it's
but it's got even more than the book.
It's a very serious examination of Don's work. It's not in the book, and it's just bucolic and rustic, and a lovely drive, especially this time of year. And
it's definitely worth the trip. It's the exhibit just couldn't be more beautiful and moving and exciting and everything else. He's done a marvelous job of putting these pictures together.
DeeAnne, we're almost out of time, and we want to take some questions from the floor. But I just want to talk about your personal relationship with Leonard Bernstein.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Don worked with Lenny for a long time, and as I said, he toured with him in Russia and the Middle East and other places, and of course, I got to know them too. The most memorable thing, he often, Don every year went over to take a picture of Lenny and his family for his Christmas card, and I was going along at one point, and I was already 9 months pregnant, and we were actually the child had been expected in this was our daughter, our second one, had been expected in Thanksgiving, and she didn't arrive until the 10th of December. But in any case, I was happy to go along, and they treated me, he and Felicia treated me so nicely, and then they sent the most beautiful baby present when she was born. But they were always very, very, very gracious, and of course Lenny was a fantastic musician and wonderful character as well. So it was a nice relationship, and you know, Don got along with Lenny very well.
Well, Bernstein was very television aware. He was very aware of his image.
Oh, yeah.
Did he like look over Don's shoulder, say, you know, don't show that one?
You know something? I don't think he did. I don't know that there was ever any. I think he trusted Don. Don did such great pictures of him.
Yeah.
And he was often in what was then, it was before it was Avery Fisher, but it was Philharmonic Hall, I think it was. and he did some wonderful pictures from overhead. There was one, oh no, I'm sorry, that was in Carnegie Hall, I think, when a lens cap actually fell down and went ping right in front, right in front of Lenny as he was conducting. That wasn't too, but anyway, there were some interesting things. But yeah, Lenny, totally accepted him, as most people did. I mean, one of the reasons why he got these great pictures is people felt very comfortable with him because he didn't make his presence obvious. He was, like he said, a fly on the wall. He was just there in the background, taking the pictures. People felt very relaxed, and so that was one of the reasons why I think people were so comfortable, that they really were who they were. They weren't, preening or pretending to be, some glamorous person or whatever. They were just relaxed. And that's what he said. They were just people to me. That's what Don always said.
The book has some really wild, soul costumes from the 70s and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And even those people, they look behind the rhinestones and the feathers and LaBelle being from outer space. I mean, they still look like real people in there.
Yeah.
So he must have brought out something just human in them.
No, that's true. Of course, those things were staged particularly for album covers, for publicity purposes. But even at that, he could make them feel comfortable. They're. What can I say? People seem, just like Artie says in the introduction to the book, those people, I mean, Artie really enjoyed having his picture taken. Don was always full of funny stories. A moment didn't go by that he couldn't make you laugh or just relax. And just one little thing. Yo-Yo Ma was recording with Maniacs, and Don had to rush off and do something, and so he said, "Okay, here, you entertain them." And I was sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, I can't remember a single joke." I mean, And so we kind of laughed, and we all kind of participated in this. But I said, I was always in awe of Don's ability to be very funny.
I love the way that Don became basically the staff photographer of Philadelphia International Records from 72 to 75. The Philly sound was basically the successor in the 70s to the Motown sound in the 60s. And Don would go to Philadelphia. Would he drive or take the train?
I'm not sure, because I drove down there with him a couple times, but I don't know whether, I didn't.
Don, and this isn't in the book, and it's very disappointing, but when the OJs recorded Ship Ahoy, Don brought the OJs to the Atlantic Ocean on the boardwalk, and you see them looking out on the horizon. He brought Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes with a young Teddy Pendergrass into a bar in South Philadelphia. He brought the Intruders, who sang Cowboys to Girls, into a barber shop. He took Billy Paul, who sang Me and Mrs. Jones, and he laid him out on a couch with African prints, and Billy looked so regal and majestic. That's a soul brother right over there.
So should we turn it over to our esteemed audience?
We do have time to take a couple questions still, so if anybody has anything, I can bring a mic over to you. Do you have any questions out there this evening?
I'm just curious, you said that the exhibit is special. It does not have any of the photos that are in the book. Oh no, that was wrong.
Well,
it has more than is in the book.
More than a lot of them that are not in the book.
Yes, yes.
It has many of the ones.
We were trying to distinguish the exhibit from the book, and that's the motivation.
It has some of the good ones from the book too.
Yeah.
How did the recreation of the Freewheelin photo in Vanilla Sky happen?
Oh, well, Cameron Crowe was a big fan of Don's. Oh, I'm sorry. Cameron Crowe loved Don's pictures, and he actually purchased a copy of the Freewheelin cover. I think that was like the first time Don ever sold a picture or whatever, but his assistant said, oh, he just had to have this in his office, and we got it for him. And so the first movie that he made right after that was Almost Famous. And we were invited to the opening and all the parties and everything. That was quite a scene. And then when he made from Vanilla Sky, he imitated that painting, in the movie, and then he sent us a frame from that, a printout of that frame where he imitates with Tom Cruise and right in that, right. So I mean, it was. I think of all these.
Well, I mean, what a homage.
Right, exactly.
That photo's been imitated a lot, but.
And people once in a while called my attention to, oh, they're stealing Don's picture, and I said, something, that is that's a wonderful homage, that they felt that picture is meaningful enough to be able to recreate it in another way or to use it. I always felt it was an honor.
We did have a couple on this side of the room.
I was just wondering, many artists have projects on the side besides what they do for work. Were there any other photographic or artistic things that he did on the side besides musicians and portraits?
Oh, yeah. Well, how about fruits and vegetables? He actually started it off because he had a friend who was designing a restaurant associates restaurant in Chicago, and asked him to do some pictures, big blow-ups of pictures of fruits and vegetables, and he really got into it, and he took many more than were necessary, and then he used them for a mural in our room, and then I said, oh, well, listen, why don't we try to sell these? And I went to Bloomingdale's, and they picked up the whole idea, and then they were selling vegetable pictures, and so anyway, that was it. But then he got into a lot of other things. Let's see.
There are some fantastic New York City photos.
Oh, well, the book of New York City photos was really before almost all of this, the rest of this came about, because this was in his very early years in New York. He got an assignment by a British publisher to do a tourist book on New York, Hamlin publisher, and it was one fee. They paid him, I don't know how much, probably not very much. Anyway, he went out and he had such a good time photographing New York and some of these pictures are really classics. Bob Dylan used his picture of Times Square on his Chronicles book. He knew about the book, and he knew Don's pictures of New York. And then that turned into a whole project of the Puerto Ricans in New York, because he became very friendly with the Puerto Rican community. He got into all of their social events, went to their weddings and their prom things, and we were married by a Puerto Rican judge, someone he got, Enrique and Torres, right, in his chambers in the Bronx. Anyway, so the Puerto Rican pictures were supposed to be published, but never were, because the Little Brown's the person who was behind the project left the company, and we still are hoping that someday it's published and there's another museum show in that, because it's really very special. So anyway, that was also a legacy of Cartier-Bresson, I think.
And Dylan uses Don's picture of Times Square in Chronicles on the back cover, I believe.
And the front cover. It was the back cover in the first edition, then they put it on.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Right.
John wrote something beautiful. He said, this book is a triple memento. It's a close-up of the artists who've transfigured the 20th century. It's a keepsake from an era when media giants deeply were true curators of culture. But most of all, it's the legacy of a man who worked for artists and their record company to reveal, ever so gradually and always modestly, an enduring vision of his own. Now, this book takes on a new poignancy and a new urgency, because a few years ago Don was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he has his good days and his not so good days, and today is definitely one of the good days because he's with us.
Yes.
We did have one more question down here in the front.
I don't have a question, but I do want to share a small story to show that Don was an artist not only to the very, very famous, but to a nobody. And I was a nobody that lived in the base of the Pocono Mountains, a very small town, and a classical pianist in my community and had a community music school, and wanted pictures taken, and no one in the area was taking pictures. And I thought, you know, I'm going to call New York City and see if I can find a photographer. And I just flipped open the Yellow Pages, and Don Hunstein was one of the people that I called, and there was another studio, which I don't remember. Lo and behold, a day or two later, the phone rang, and it was Don Hunstein. We were on the phone for almost an hour. He asked me about what I did, how I believed in people, what my motivation was, and I was no one. He had me come to New York City. He did my photos. He came to my music school. He did the photos of my music school, of all my teachers. Him and his lovely wife, DeeAnne, came to our concerts. And I am a nobody, so Don treated no one as well as he treated Bob Dylan. He was an artist and a wonderful, wonderful human being, and I am just one of thousands of people that could sing his praises for what he has done for the music community, for people that had no money. Because for myself, the only thing I ever paid Don Hunstein was for the cost of the film, for the pictures, and I felt like a queen. So, Don, I love you, and DeeAnne, I love you, and I thank you both. Music and artists, thank you both for everything that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda.
Great. Well, we're actually out of time for the evening. I wanted to extend a thanks on behalf of the Strand to Leo, Jon, DeeAnne, and especially Don for joining us this evening. If you haven't already checked out a copy of Keeping Time, please do so on your way out. Thank you all for being here this evening.